Good afternoon. This is a presentation on Fair Districts, Pennsylvania, and the concept of gerrymandering. And before we start with the PowerPoint slides, I'd like to give you a little story. I was driving to Cumberland County, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, in 2012. And as I crossed the Cumberland County line, there was a sign for Lou Barletta for the 11th District of Congress. Now, Lou was a mayor of Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Hazleton was about 200 miles from Carlisle. And I thought to myself, gosh, did Lou move down here to Carlisle and is he running for Congress down here? Or is this a different Lou Barletta? Well, I wanted to find out. So when I went back to check, what I found out was that, yes, Lou was still up in Hazleton, but he was running for Congress down in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, because what had happened was the districts had been drawn in such a way that they went north to south, and it was a very narrow district from almost the New York border down to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. If Lou had run up in the Northeast, at least at that time in 2012, most of that was Democratic territory. Lou was a Republican. So, in essence, Lou would have had an uphill fight in northeastern Pennsylvania. But because the lines were drawn north to south through a very Republican area, Lou easily won election to the 11th district. So that's what we're talking about today in terms of fair districts and a concept called gerrymandering. We're going to talk about what gerrymandering is, how it's done, why it matters, and how it can be fixed. To understand the concept of gerrymandering, you first have to understand the concept of redistricting. Once every 10 years, the United States performs a census, and we find out the population of each state, and we use those population statistics to draw legislative and congressional lines. This is done to ensure compliance with the one man, one vote requirement that was promulgated by the state Supreme Court decades ago. And it also makes sure that the representative districts are relatively equal in population. So what is gerrymandering? Well, again, we do the census every 10 years. But what happens is, in gerrymandering, the concept and the process is that the lines are drawn to help one party over the other. And they do this through sophisticated software computer programs in which one party is given quite a bit of advantage over another party, and it predetermines election outcomes even before the first vote is cast. So instead of voters picking their representatives, politicians are picking their voters. So what's wrong with gerrymandering? Well, what happens here is that politicians are stuffing voters into favorable political districts and putting other voters into other districts, and what happens in the end is that there's less competition among the candidates, and it results in less meaningful choices. And what also happens is that voter turnout is reduced because if you know the outcome of the election, maybe you're not even going to go vote. So we think that fair districts will help end some of this political gridlock that we have in Washington and Harrisburg, that it will prevent the abuse of political power, and that it will create more competitive elections, and we also think it will encourage more voter participation. Realizing that Pennsylvania is the third worst district in terms of gerrymandering, we're only behind North Carolina and Michigan in terms of our gerrymandered districts. But it is right to say that gerrymandering is endemic in the United States. The website 538 did an analysis of our 3,100 and some counties. And what they found was that only 10% of the counties were really battleground states, that is competitive, meaning that the winning candidate won by either 10% or less. The counties that were decided by 50% or more, 38% of them were decided by that particular percentage. So who draws the lines in Pennsylvania? Well, it's done by 5 different people, and they do it on their own, usually behind closed doors, and without any public input. And the 5 people are the Senate Majority and Minority Leader, the House Majority and Minority Leader, and then there's a 5th person that's selected as the chair of this group. Usually what happens is they can't agree on a chair because of political differences. So then at that point the Supreme Court intervenes and they select a person to be the chair. By the way, on that, the governor has no authority. It's just those 5 people that make the decision. So what happened in 2011? Well, we had the 2010 census. We got our population. We found out how many seats we had, which was 18. And then at that point, we had to draw the lines. Well, the Republicans controlled both the House and the Senate at the time. They also controlled the Supreme Court. So they drew the lines in what we call a partisan gerrymandered fashion. That is, they drew the lines to their advantage. Here was the map that they drew, and you can see the 11th district there from Wyoming County all the way down to Cumberland County. You can see some of the other crazy things like this 12th district that's separated out by a very small piece up here. You can see over here Pike County, that's at the New York border, all the way down here to Perry County, which is a suburb of Harrisburg, so that's a huge district. The 7th district, which is down in southeastern Pennsylvania, I will show you in a minute. That's considered one of the most gerrymandered districts in the country. So what happened in the 2012 elections? The lines have been drawn here in Pennsylvania. We had our vote. 5,400,000 and some thousand people voted in that particular election. Out of that, the Democrats won the majority of the votes in that particular election by about 80,000 votes. So if we had 18 different congressional seats, you would think that if there was only 80,000 votes that separated the two parties, and we had 18 seats, that it probably would end up 9 Republicans and 9 Democrats that would enter the House of Representatives as our representatives to Congress. But that's not what happened. Democrats got 5 seats, and the Republicans got 13 seats. So the Democrats won 51% of the votes, but they got 28% of the seats. Conversely, the Republicans won 51%, but they got 72% of the seats. That's called gerrymandering. And it was pretty much a permanent kind of a thing in the 2014 election and the 2016 election. So I told you I would show you the 7th Congressional District. As I said, this is one of the most gerrymandered districts in Pennsylvania and in fact in the United States. It encompasses 5 different counties. It is connected very loosely with 2 small connections. One is a parking lot through a pizza parlor. The other is through somebody's backyard. Many people can see Goofy kicking Donald Duck. I just see some ink blots, but you can see this is not the way you should be drawing congressional districts. So to stop gerrymandering in Pennsylvania, we have a three-step process. We have to amend our Constitution, and we have to do this through voting both in our legislature and through a referendum. So an amendment has to pass both houses, both the Senate and the House, or yes, the Senate and the House. It does not need the governor's signature, but it has to pass the State House and the State Senate 2 times in 2 consecutive legislative sessions. And if that happens, then we can put the amendment on the ballot, and our citizens of Pennsylvania can then vote on whether they want that particular amendment. So if we are going to reform the way we draw our district lines, we're going to have to pass that amendment both in the 2017-18 session and the 2019-20 session. So how can redistricting system be fixed? Well, you can make the game a lot fairer. You can make it nonpartisan, you can make it transparent, and you can make it open to public input. One of the ways to do that is to create an independent, nonpartisan Citizens Redistricting Commission to draw both the congressional and the legislative district boundaries. Currently, we have 2 bills. The bills are exactly the same in both the State House and the State Senate that would, in fact, create that independent commission. House Bill 722 and Senate Bill 22. This independent commission would be made up of 11 members, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 3 independents or minority party members. These would be qualified people that would be selected randomly by the Pennsylvania Secretary of State. Now, what makes a commission nonpartisan? Well, you'd have no current or past ties to elected officials. You couldn't be a former legislator, for instance. And the group would be diverse to assure fairness of the process. What makes a commission independent? Well, you would not be subject to legislative approval. Your decisions would be final. You would have sufficient funds to do your job. What makes the process open to public participation? Well, what we would do is this commission would be very transparent. They would have to show us what particular software they made available to themselves to draw their lines. They would also have to show us plans that they rejected. They would have to have public hearings, and they would have to be able to look at alternate plans that could be submitted by anybody across the state. So in conclusion, there is lots of evidence and agreement that the current system needs to be reformed, and that we need to use some sort of mechanism, like an independent commission, to draw these lines. Both parties have suffered, and there's been lack of representation as a consequence. Election system for voters should be representative, and we should have accountable systems and also responsive systems. So what can you do? You can call our particular legislators in Adams County. There are their names: Dan Moll, Will Tallman, and Richard Alloway. Also, both of these bills right now sit in state government committees, and we need to get those bills out of committee and voted on. The particular individuals that chair those committees are in the House, Representative Darrell Metcalf, and in the Senate, Senator Mike Fulmer. There are their phone numbers. Also, you can join us at Fair Districts Adams County, either on our Facebook or by emailing us at this address. I want to thank you for your time.